capitalism, inclusive capitalism, natural capitalism, healing capitalism, or a social market economy is one that of late has also become somewhat common. And so all of them in some way trying to take the system that dominates in terms of the global financial system, and I think how discussing in ways that it might be adjusted, which it might be more inclusive of the environment and of the human persons that are a part of that. And clearly one of the drivers in this whole question has been the papacy of Pope Francis. And we've discussed that in previous sessions here at SRIC, but also clearly Benedict XVI before him and Pope John Paul II. It's been a constant part of the Catholic social question about the system itself and what its social purpose is, what it's doing in terms of advancing development across the world, and how it's affecting human development, but also how it's affecting the environment and ecology. A couple of, thanks, Luke. We'll look at the next slide that tells us what's happening out there. This is from one of the quotes from Caritas and Veritate that for me I think sums this up. There's an increasing awareness of the need for greater social responsibility on the part of business. And I think Sister Susan pointed that out as she traced the history of SRIC and your all activity in engaging the corporations that you might hold in your portfolio. There is nevertheless a growing conviction that business management can't concern itself only with the interest of the proprietors, but must also assume responsibility for all other stakeholders who contribute to the life of the business. And who are those stakeholders? The workers, the clients, the suppliers of various elements of production, the community of reference. And that's fairly representative of what you can read in any of the recent papal encyclicals and in the pastoral letter of the U.S. bishops in 1986. Thanks, Luca. Going outside of the religious framework, here's a comment from Paul Druckmann from the International Integrated Reporting Council. I am in awe of what capitalism has achieved over the last century, the innovation it has inspired, the lifting of nations out of poverty, and the absolute level of economic growth that has been generated. And we hear that often in listening to different debates. You hear it on CNBC, on Bloomberg, when you read Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and when you listen to many corporate leaders. I find it astounding that US GDP alone has increased sixfold in a generation. And we're always debating the question of growth, how much growth is necessary, and that's even a debate today in terms of whether or not the anemic growth within the US economy is one that we can adjust to, the economy can adjust to, and the global economy can adjust to. Yet we must confront the problem that wealth today is not broadly shared. Inequality within nations is rising, and as the International Monetary Fund has said, this growing inequality is acting as a drag on economic growth. So you begin to see the organizations or institutions like the International Monetary Fund pointing at some real gaps and some real areas that need further scrutiny. Thanks, Luke. Klaus Schwab organizes that famous economic forum in Davos, Switzerland that we watch every January as the corporate types fly in there in the midst of the Alps and debate the issues of poverty and development. Capitalism in its current form no longer fits the world around us, is what he said. This conclusion is now broadly shared by business leaders, investors, policymakers, and academics across the world. And from somebody like Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, every CEO should lay out for shareholders each year a strategic framework for long-term value creation, which was one of the points that Sister Susan lifted up earlier. And I think the final slide is a comment from, this was an op-ed piece in the Washington Post last fall by Tom Wilson, who's the chief executive of Allstate and the vice chair of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I had to read it twice because I couldn't quite believe what he was writing. The emphasis on profits has widened the trust gap between corporations and society, resulting in an adversarial relationship between the private and the public sectors. Let me be clear, shareholders must get a good return, but at the same time, corporations must work to be a force for good in society. I think we could all say yes to that. The corporation of the next 100 years must take on societal problems. On their own, governments, social service, and charitable organizations simply do not have the capabilities and resources to solve the problems of inadequate education, poverty, or public fiscal insolvency. Corporations should be encouraged and rewarded for stepping up to solve society's problems. That will require a change in mindset. Today, corporate leaders are graded on stock price, not on the amount of good their companies do. We must broaden the way that we evaluate corporations beyond share prices to provide space, light, and water for their role to grow. Definitely a much more forward-looking and open vision that it seems to me is consistent with a lot of what Pope Francis has said in Laudato Si, and many other religious leaders are also calling us to. There might be one more, I think, you can skip this one. This goes back to just remind us that the tradition of what Pope Francis is referring to is built on St. John Paul II, which said we require an ecological conversion, a radical and fundamental change in our attitudes to creation, to the poor, and to the priorities of the global economy. And clearly, by pointing to the example of St. Francis in his choice of name, Pope Francis elevates that sensitivity and that consciousness to a whole different level. Let's see if that's the end, I hope. There you go. This is the end. The Green Pope, it was Benedict XVI. Pope Francis takes up this eminently in pastoral terms when he says the creation of a new mindset which thinks in terms of community and the priority of the life of all over the appropriation of goods by a few. We're really excited this evening that we've got the three folks that Veronica already introduced, who I think represent in their institutions some of the thinking at the larger scale here in their efforts and what they're doing to try to awaken and educate all of us about how we can be very much a part of that. So they're each going to offer some comments on their own work. Then we'll have a few questions that we've looked at beforehand, but if there are some questions immediately that come into your mind, we want to certainly leave enough time for those as well. So, Shawn, you want to start off?
Sure.
There's a microphone right now.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So, as Sister Veronica mentioned, I was an attorney for over 20 years, and here in San Antonio, working in the field of estate administration, guardianships, dealt a lot with incapacity, with a lot of broken families and bodies, a lot of mental illness, and just kind of a pretty difficult space. And so in the practice of law, I saw a lot of people that were poor in spirit, that were, I would see a lot of people that would come to me and they would have a situation that was pretty tough, and someone was not treating them well. And I love the fact that I could hop in and do something about it and be their voice and advocate for them. So that's kind of one of the hats that I wear. Another hat I wear is that I want you to know my father was 100% Irish, came from a family of 14 children, and when his father died young, and he was the oldest son, and so my dad had to just kind of put everything aside and start taking care of the family and start basically providing. So he never finished college, just had to start working. Well, about the time that I came along, and a few years thereafter, basically my dad, we were living in a small town, and the only job he could find was in a local factory. And so he was just a hardworking man trying to support my family. Well, this company was making this product and did not have the safety measures in place. And so he ingested a lot of toxic chemicals into his lungs, and it slowly killed him. And that's what he died from. He died premature death, and so my father was somebody that was very poor in health due to irresponsible corporate action. And so that is very much part of who I am, and part of the way I look at life. Another kind of place from which I come is, so I've had the privilege of doing some really neat things over the years. One, I've worked with International Justice Mission in some different places. One is in the Philippines, working with street children and girls who are being trafficked, trying to work with the system there to help advocate for some of those needs. I've also worked, we have a long-term relationship with a community in Guatemala that works in the garbage dump there. They make their living by scavenging through the garbage dump. And so when my children turned about 10, I began to take them there and let them see someone who lives with dirt floors and who works super hard to make $2 or $3 a day. And so I see these people who lack opportunity and resources and affection, and that becomes a part of who I am as well. So that's part of the lens in which I view life, and the lens in which I sit here today. So practicing law for all these years, if you would have told me a few years ago that I would start working at a bank, I would have thought, what in the world? Why would I work at a bank? I represented some banks, several banks here in town. Of the banks I represented, I always had a favorite, and that was Broadway Bank. Love the way that they are a locally owned bank. So just to tell you a little bit about Broadway, we just celebrated our 75th anniversary. We're a locally, privately owned bank, and we have about 650 employees. And one of the things I love about Broadway is that all the decisions are local. The family who's the majority owners live here. They're accessible. I can walk into their office. They work in the bank. They don't let their children or grandchildren come to work at the bank just because they need a job. They have to apply. They have to meet the requirements. They get the same wage that someone else would receive. And so that's kind of a really cool thing. So one of the things, too, I love about Broadway is Broadway Bank started with the mission of serving military families and just serving everyday folks like you and I. They started, Colonel Charles E. Cheever and his wife Betty started the bank, and they basically had a vision that they said, if we take care of our employees and we take care of our customers, then the business will take care of itself. And still to this day, that is the focus of Broadway Bank. And I'm so proud to be working with them because they basically have the mantra that there's no transaction, there's no business deal that's worth our integrity or the name of our business. There is, we're not a transaction-driven business. We're not just trying to get the next deal. We're a very relational bank, and so we're trying to work on long-term relationships with business owners, with individuals. And then one of the things too is the bank really puts our money and our time and our people where our mouth is. And then last year we participated in 186 local projects. Amazing. We also give money, but with that money we leverage it with people. We leverage it with time. And it's just really amazing to watch the impact in the community. In fact, it's one thing too to have values on paper. So our values are trust and creativity and community and excellence and honesty, those type of things. But just a couple days ago, it's so important that just a couple days ago, there was an award given to a lady who had gone above and beyond. She received a 3-day, 2-night vacation away and cash in her pocket because she gave back to her community. And it's something that's highlighted all the time at Broadway, is giving back to the community. So the thing I love is that employees are valued, and one of the things we do is we do need to make money. We need to make money for the owners of the bank. We need to make money to keep going. But what is continually looked at the bank is what is the quality of life we're providing for our employees? What is the way that we are impacting our community? and what is the way that we're impacting and being a part of the lives of our customers. It's a really wonderful group of people. And in fact, one other thing I'll tell you before I pass it off here is they have even allowed me, so it's one thing to respond to need in the city and to say, okay, someone comes to us with a need, let's give them some money, let's give them some time, let's give them some man hours. That's a fantastic thing. But they've really allowed me to jump in and with some of the family to say, how can we not only respond to change, how can we affect change? So we're in conversation with the mayor's office and some people around town saying, what are some needs in this community? What are some needs as far as financial literacy, education, access to credit, safe homes, building homes in low-income areas where families can be stable? What are some of these needs that we can dive into from the beginning and not only, again, respond to change, but be a part of that change and affect the change? And so for those reasons, I'm super proud to be a part of Broadway, and I feel like the approach that the platform we have, the approach to putting people over profits is the real deal, and it's just really fun. So I'll tell you more along the way. Pass that on.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here this evening. Those of us who've been around a long time remember that saying back from the 1970s, you give somebody a fish, they eat for a day. You teach somebody how to fish and they eat for a lifetime. Well, I think the work that we do in economic development, and specifically at LiftFund, is that we help people buy the pond where they fish, and now they have an asset, and we're able then to give something to the next generation. So that's how I believe that we can break the cycle of poverty, is by giving on to the next generation and stopping what has been going on year over year. And so, we were all taught about, we need to make sure that people have shelter and food and clothing. But if we don't have $1 to purchase that food and that shelter and clothing, what are we going to do? And so I love the work that we do at LiftFund because it combines those two things. It combines the social justice and the capitalism. It's social service and capitalism, trying to be able to level that financial playing field for our families. A lot of us, when we grew up, we were taught to be just good to one another. But none of us were, actually, I never knew about the stock market. I never knew about investing in the stock market. My parents, they had a Mexican restaurant in Corpus Christi, Texas, and their big deal was to be able to have a rental house. That was how they would have income, right? They'd never thought about anything about the stock market. And so by us, and then people don't realize too that, to Father's point earlier, is that if we borrow money, it's okay. People think we have to save in terms of the business world to get what needs to be done, but it's because people don't know how to use money. People get rich because they don't use their money. They're using somebody else's money. And so what we're doing is we're trying to help people, educate the people, educate our community on how to do that, how to level that financial playing field. And we do it specifically in the small business arena. So here in the United States, we have this thing called a FICO score. Hopefully all of you know your FICO score. FICO score means the higher your FICO score, those of us not in community, but those of us who are going to buy something individually, the higher your credit score, the less expensive it's going to be for you to purchase something. The lower your credit score, you're going to pay more for it. For example, a car, right? You go and purchase a car, it's the same price for the car, but those of us who may have a low credit score are going to pay $5,000 or $6,000 more for that car than somebody who has a higher credit score. So these are the kinds of things that we educate folks. And so, as I also talk about this work that we've been doing now for 23 years, we started that 23 years ago, there wasn't a micro and small business community, lending community, nonprofit like LiftFund in San Antonio. And so we're not a bank, we're a financial institution without depositors. Banks use deposits that we put into their bank and credit unions and so on to be able to lend out to in our community. As a not-for-profit organization, we have to rely on grants, which is equity, and investments, which is debt. And so this business model has been around now for 20, 30 years in terms of the CDFI movement. And the CDFI movement is the Community Development Financial Institute movement across our country. And if you Google Opportunity Fund Network, which is OFN, it's a national membership organization, they're on their website, they attribute the religious congregations as helping them invest back in the early 1990s. It was because of religious, and some of those groups were actually Jewish folks that were leading those organizations. But they attribute religious congregations as the instigator to be able to create the CDFI movement, the Community Development Financial Institute movement. And they'll say there, if you go on the video, they said it's because when they got these investments from the religious congregations, most of them in the beginning were women congregations. They said, they make a point to say, when we borrowed the money from the sisters, there's no way that we were going to not be able to pay them back. So they figured out ways to be able to use the investment from the sisters to be able to do that. And so as we as institutions of this not-for-profit world, we're doing social justice work and then also improving the lives of families, right? So the way our actual business model is that we help people that are right underneath the radar screen of the banks. Going back to the credit scores. Banks cutoff for anybody is 680 of a FICO score. The average credit score of one of our customers is 580. And we have a 96% repayment rate. So we've learned how to mitigate risk over these years. Because what we do is we're able to take more time with an individual, a small business owner, to help figure out what is really going on. Since we're not a for-profit company, we're able to take that time to be able to figure out. We actually lose money. Our average loan size is $19,000. We lose money on anything under $20,000. And so, thus, I mean, not for profit, right? But that being said, we're always trying to figure out ways to streamline and become more efficient in the way we do business. We started here in San Antonio back in 1994. Actually, I was the first employee of LiftFund. And I remember Sister Carol Costin, who at that time was running partners for the Common Good Loan Fund, gave me a 101 on microlending, right, about what does it mean to be able to run or operate an organization like this. So then we were really working like a microlender, just how you do it in Guatemala or Mexico or Bolivia and different places, developing countries. And in developing countries, they have what we call peer group lending circles. You all are familiar with that, so I'm not going to go into that. So when we first started in 1994 here in San Antonio, we ran the model just like they do in developing countries. Peer group lending model and step lending. Didn't make any difference if we could lend up to $25,000. The first loan that you would get was $3,000. Didn't make any difference